For thousands of years, a shimmering thread of trade and ideas stretched across the vast expanse of the known world, connecting the dragon thrones of China to the marble forums of Rome. It was not a single paved highway, but a shifting, perilous network of mountain passes, sun-scorched deserts, and bustling oasis towns. To the merchants who braved it, it was a path to unimaginable wealth. To the scholars and monks who traveled it, it was a bridge between civilizations that had never before looked upon one another's faces. We call it the Silk Road, a romantic name coined by a German geographer in the 19th century. But the story of this journey is far deeper than the goods it carried. It is the story of how the world first began to shrink and how humanity began to share its soul across the clouds. Tonight, we step onto the caravan trails of the ancient world. We will follow the soft clinking of camel bells from the eastern gates of Chang'an, through the high, thin air of the Pamir Mountains, into the perfumed markets of Persia, and finally to the shores of the Mediterranean. This is the story of the Silk Road, the journey that wove the world together. To understand the Silk Road, we must first look to the east, where the mystery of silk began. While archaeological evidence shows that silk production began in the mists of the Neolithic Age, legend tells a more poetic story. It says that an empress was sipping tea beneath a mulberry tree when a cocoon fell into her cup. As it softened in the heat, she pulled a single, shimmering thread that seemed to go on forever. Whether by accident or design, the Chinese mastered the art of sericulture, turning it into a state-guarded monopoly. For centuries, the secret of the silkworm was the most closely guarded treasure of the Han dynasty. They wove this delicate fiber into a fabric that felt like water and shone like the moon. Silk was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. It was lighter than wool, smoother than linen, and it caught the sunlight like flowing silver. Chinese nobles wore it as a symbol of heaven's favor, while emperors gifted bolts of silk to generals, diplomats, and allied kings as a form of currency more valuable than gold. In the West, particularly in Rome, silk became an obsession. It was so rare and so expensive that some Roman senators complained it was draining the empire's gold and corrupting the morals of the people. They called it woven wind, and they would pay any price to have it. Roman writers described aristocrats draping themselves in transparent silks so delicate that critics like Seneca claimed they were clothed in nothing. Yet the Romans had almost no idea where the fabric truly came from. Many believed silk was harvested from trees in some distant eastern paradise. The world was still fragmented then, and the Silk Road became the fragile thread stitching those fragments together. But the Silk Road was born from more than just a desire for luxury. It was born from a need for horses. In the 2nd century BC, the Han Emperor Wu sent an envoy named Zhang into the mysterious West to find allies against nomadic raiders. His journey was brutal. He was captured by the Xiongnu tribes and held prisoner for over a decade before escaping and continuing westward. Most men would have turned back. Zhang pressed on into lands no Chinese diplomat had ever seen. What he found instead were the heavenly horses of the Fergana Valley Tall, powerful steeds that supposedly sweated blood and could carry a rider to victory. To the Han dynasty, these horses seemed almost supernatural compared to the smaller breeds of China. Emperor Wu became determined to possess them, believing they were the key to defeating the mounted raiders threatening his empire. This discovery opened the eyes of the Chinese to a world beyond their borders. Zhang returned with stories of rich kingdoms, bustling cities, and strange customs. Trade began to flow, not just for horses, but for jade, lacquer, and iron, moving westward in exchange for glass, wool, amber, silver, and the deep blue stones of lapis lazuli. What had begun as a diplomatic mission slowly transformed into the most complex trade network in human history. Imagine standing at the gates of Chang'an as a caravan prepares to depart. Hundreds of Bactrian camels, with their thick coats and twin humps, are loaded with heavy bales. They are the ships of the desert, the only creatures capable of surviving the journey ahead. Their broad feet press softly into the dust, while their drivers tighten ropes and inspect saddlebags filled with silk, tea, ceramics, and paper scrolls. The merchants are a mix of cultures: Sogdians, Persians, Indians, Turks, and Chinese. The Sogdians, in particular, were the true masters of this trail. Originating from the heart of Central Asia, they were the master linguists and middlemen who spoke every tongue and navigated every oasis. They were bound together by the universal language of prophet. Some carry small charms for protection. Others whisper prayers before leaving home, uncertain if they will ever return. As the city walls fade behind them, they enter the Hexi Corridor, a thin strip of green between the mountains and the desert. The last taste of home before the true test begins. Watchtowers rise in the distance, remnants of the Great Wall system that guarded the empire's frontier. Soldiers stationed there scan the horizon for raiders and signal danger with smoke by day and fire by night. Beyond those towers lies the wilderness of Central Asia, where imperial authority weakens and survival depends entirely on the caravan itself. The greatest challenge for any traveler was the Taklamakan Desert. Its name is often translated as the place where you go in, but never come out. It is a landscape of shifting dunes and howling winds that the ancients believed were the voices of ghosts trying to lure travelers off the path. Sandstorms could appear without warning, swallowing entire caravans beneath waves of dust. Travelers sometimes tied themselves to their camels at night so they would not wander into the darkness while half asleep from exhaustion. To survive, caravans moved from oasis to oasis towns like Dunhuang, Khotan, and Kashgar, where underground irrigation systems brought life-giving water from the distant mountains. These oasis cities were miracles carved out of the desert. Poplar trees swayed beside streams, vineyards grew along dusty roads, and market stalls overflowed with melons, nuts, rugs, and spices. The towns became the melting pots of the world. In the markets of Kashgar, a traveler could hear the chanting of Buddhist monks, the prayers of Zoroastrians, the songs of Turkic traders, and the debates of Greek-influenced scholars all in the same afternoon. Dunhuang, standing at the edge of the desert, became one of the Silk Road's most important crossroads. Before entering the deadly sands, caravans would stop there to rest and pray for protection. Monks carved temples into the cliffs nearby, creating the famous Mogao Caves, sometimes called the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. Inside, artists painted walls with glowing images of flying celestial beings, merchants in foreign dress, and scenes from Buddhist stories. Even today, those murals preserve a snapshot of the cultures that once flowed along the Silk Road like rivers through the sand. It was in these quiet oasis stops that the Silk Road carried its most transformative cargo: ideas. Buddhism, born in India, traveled along these trails into China, carried by monks who crossed deserts and mountains in search of sacred texts. Some monks spent years translating scriptures from Sanskrit into Chinese by candlelight. Their work changed the spiritual landscape of East Asia forever. Later, Christianity, Manichaeism, and Islam would follow the same paths, spreading not through conquest alone, but through conversation, trade, and human curiosity. But it wasn't just religion. The Silk Road was the internet of the ancient world. It carried the secret of papermaking from China to the West. Tradition tells us that Chinese artisans were captured during the Battle of Talas in the 8th century and taken to Samarkand, where they were forced to share their craft. From there, paper spread into the Islamic world and eventually Europe, revolutionizing the preservation of knowledge. Before paper, books had to be copied onto expensive parchment or cumbersome bamboo strips. Suddenly, ideas could travel faster, cheaper, and survive longer. The Silk Road also carried mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and engineering. Indian numerals moved westward, and evolved into the number system used across much of the world today. Persian astronomers charted the heavens with astonishing precision, while Chinese inventors shared technologies like printing and gunpowder. Even diseases traveled the same roads. Alongside scholars and pilgrims came microbes invisible to the eye, reminding humanity that connection always carries both creation and destruction. As the trail moved further west, it ascended into the roof of the world, the Pamir and Hindu Kush Mountains. This was the most dangerous part of the journey. The paths were narrow ledges cut into the sides of cliffs, where a single misstep meant a fall of thousands of feet. Avalanches could bury travelers without warning. Bandits watched from hidden valleys, waiting for weakened caravans carrying fortunes in silk and silver. The air was so thin that travelers struggled to breathe, and the cold could freeze a man in his sleep. Fires burned weakly at those altitudes, and water froze solid before dawn. Yet they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that on the other side lay the wealthy heart of the Sassanid Persian Empire. The Persians were the great gatekeepers of the Silk Road. In cities like Ctesiphon, Samarkand, and Merv, they controlled the flow of goods, taxing the silk as it moved toward Europe and the glass as it moved toward Asia. Persian merchants carried not only goods, but stories, poetry, and scientific knowledge. The Persian court was a place of legendary opulence, filled with heavy silver plates, intricate carpets, and the scent of rosewater drifting through palace halls. Persian art itself became a fusion of cultures, blending influences from Greece, India, Central Asia, and China into something entirely unique. Further west, the trail passed into the Levant, where caravans finally reached the Mediterranean world. Goods traveled through the great ports of Antioch and Tyre, where they were loaded onto ships destined for Rome, Constantinople, and Alexandria. There, silk was transformed into imperial robes, spices flavored noble feasts, and ivory carvings decorated royal palaces. The journey of a single bolt of silk could span thousands of miles and pass through dozens of hands before reaching its final owner. But the Silk Road was never just a one-way street. While silk moved west, the East received things that changed their lives forever. Grapes, walnuts, cucumbers, figs, and pomegranates arrived in China from the West. New techniques for glassmaking transformed industries. Musical instruments like the lute traveled across the clouds, evolving into the instruments we know today. Dancers from Central Asia performed in the courts of Chinese emperors, and even the way people sat changed. The introduction of the chair to China is often traced back to the influence of Western furniture brought along these trade routes. By the time of the Middle Ages, the Silk Road reached a second peak under the Mongol Empire. The Mongols, feared as conquerors, also became unlikely guardians of trade. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, much of Eurasia fell under a single political system. For a brief window of time, the Mongols enforced the Pax Mongolica, a peace so secure that chroniclers claimed a traveler could walk from the Black Sea to Beijing with a golden plate on his head and never be harmed. It was during this era that a young Venetian named Marco Polo made his famous journey. He traveled through deserts, crossed mountains, and reached the court of Kublai Khan. When he returned to Europe, he brought stories of enormous cities lit by paper lanterns and black stones that burned like wood coal. He described paper money that people traded as if it were gold, something Europeans could barely imagine. Many dismissed his stories as fantasy. Yet centuries later, his accounts inspired explorers searching for new routes to Asia, including Christopher Columbus, who carried a copy of Marco Polo's writings on his own voyages. Yet every road has its shadows. The same paths that brought silk and spices also brought the Black Death. The plague moved at the speed of a caravan, jumping from flea to rat to human, devastating the populations of Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. This catastrophe, combined with political instability and the rise of sea routes, led to the decline of the overland trails. As explorers learned to sail around Africa and across the oceans, the perilous mountain passes became less profitable. The great oasis cities, once the centers of the world, slowly faded into obscurity, reclaimed by desert sands. But the Silk Road never truly disappeared. Its echoes shaped the modern world, influencing our borders, languages, religions, and cuisines. Today, the exchange of ideas that once moved by camel caravan now travels instantly through fiber optic cables, but the human desire behind it remains the same. It reminds us that even when separated by the highest mountains, humanity has always sought to connect and to understand. When we think of the Silk Road now, imagine a traveler standing on a high pass in the Pamirs, looking down at the winding trail below. They are surrounded by the silence of the clouds, but in their mind, they hear the sounds of 1,000 languages and the rustle of a silk road that never truly ended. It was a journey of ambition, but more than that, it was a journey of curiosity. Because in the end, the Silk Road proved that civilizations grow strongest, not in isolation, but in connection. Thank you for watching Layback Historian. If you enjoyed this journey across the clouds, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the people, empires, and events that shaped our history. Until next time, take care and keep exploring the past.